Thank you, Prime Minister Holness, for your kind words of introduction. I'm delighted to welcome you all to the 26th United Nations Climate Change Conference.
The bells of Windsor rang in sorrow as the world mourned the passing of Queen Elizabeth II, Britain's longest reigning monarch, the woman who defined an era and the anchor of a family long known for scandal, strength, and silence. As the nation laid its queen to rest beneath the stones of St. George's Chapel, a new reign began, but not without shadows. Behind the black veils, inside the hushed halls of Buckingham Palace, a secret was stirring. It wasn't a matter of state. It wasn't about politics, treaties, or global diplomacy. It was something far more personal, something even more powerful. A private will, handwritten by the Queen herself, sealed in her Balmoral desk, and meant only for the eyes of her most trusted child, Princess Anne. For decades, the world watched Charles ascend, Camilla rise beside him, and William and Kate prepare for the throne's future. But while the public saw tradition unfold like a well-rehearsed play, they never knew what the Queen left behind, a message of truth, loyalty, and final wishes she never dared to share while alive. And when Princess Anne finally revealed the contents of that secret will, King Charles reportedly broke down in tears. It wasn't just grief, it was shock, regret, and maybe even guilt. Because the will didn't just speak to titles or treasures. It spoke to truths the Queen had kept buried, names she'd protected, relationships she'd questioned, and decisions she'd postponed for the sake of appearances. It said her words praised Anne's quiet loyalty, reaffirmed her trust in William, and, most damning of all, never once mentioned Camilla as queen. And with that, a new fracture formed within the royal family, one not born of tabloids or televised interviews, but of the Queen's own final unfiltered voice. This is the story of what happened after the world said goodbye to Elizabeth II and how the crown she left behind became heavier than ever. Because some secrets aren't meant to stay buried, and when a mother speaks from the grave, even a king must listen. This is the Queen's secret will, and it changes everything. Balmoral Castle had always been Queen Elizabeth's sanctuary, her private escape from the pressures of public life. It was where she spent summers as a child, where she walked the grounds with her beloved corgis, and where, in her final years, she found solace from a changing world and a fracturing family. But in the weeks following her passing, Balmoral became the setting for something extraordinary. Tucked away in a locked drawer within the Queen's private study, behind old letters, diaries, and faded family photographs, Princess Anne discovered an envelope. Not just any envelope, but one marked with her mother's personal wax seal and the words, "To be read by Anne alone, then shared with the family." At first, it was believed to be a simple farewell note, but what Anne found inside was far more complex. It was a private will, handwritten by the Queen in ink only she used, dark navy, neat cursive, unmistakably hers. This document wasn't official, nor was it intended for the eyes of Parliament or the Privy Council. It was deeply personal, and in it, the Queen laid out her true feelings about the future of the monarchy, her children, and the titles and heirlooms that mattered most to her heart, not the crown. According to palace insiders, Anne was shaken by what she read. The Queen had expressed a growing concern about the direction of the royal family, specifically naming Charles and Camilla's leadership as unsteady ground. Though the official transition of power to King Charles had been inevitable, her private writings revealed doubts, subtle but cutting. She acknowledged Charles's passion for duty, but questioned his emotional judgment. Camilla, however, was notably absent from every significant passage, not once referred to as queen, consort, or even wife. The omission was deafening. In contrast, the Queen lavished praise on Princess Anne, referring to her as the rock of this family and the one who never asked for recognition but earned it nonetheless. She called Anne her silent sword, a woman who defended the crown by action, not words. And then there was William. To Prince William, the Queen addressed a short but poignant section. "You carry the weight of the people's trust now. Let your mother's light guide you when mine fades." It was widely interpreted as an intentional passing of moral authority, one that bypassed Charles altogether. The Queen acknowledged Diana. She did not mention Camilla. The contrast couldn't be ignored. and buried within the pages was a section labeled simply Legacy. In it, the Queen requested that certain heirlooms bypass the traditional line of inheritance. Most notably, she asked for Diana's sapphire and diamond tiara, not seen in public in decades, to be gifted to Princess Charlotte when she comes of age, as a tribute to her grandmother, the people's queen. The implications were staggering. Royal insiders whispered that this move would enrage Camilla, who had long hoped for the Queen's jewels to be redistributed in a way that recognized her new royal stature. Instead, the Queen had ensured Diana's memory would never be replaced. When Anne brought the will to the family's attention during a quiet evening at Windsor, the room reportedly fell into stunned silence. Charles, already exhausted by grief and ceremony, was visibly emotional. It said he placed a hand over his eyes as Anne read the final line aloud. "Duty is not inherited by title, but earned by character. Let my love guide you, not just my crown." The moment was more than symbolic. It was seismic. This wasn't just a goodbye. It was a correction, a course change from the grave. A final attempt by a monarch to do what she always believed in most, protect the crown by telling the truth, even if it hurt. And now that truth would tear open every crack in the royal family, starting with the king himself. For years, Princess Anne had operated in the shadows of the monarchy, not hidden, but rarely glorified. She wasn't the one photographers chased down red carpets, nor the face plastered across souvenir mugs, but quietly, consistently, Anne had become the most dependable pillar of the royal family. While others buckled under the weight of scandal or chased the limelight, Anne simply showed up, day after day, duty after duty, and Queen Elizabeth noticed. It's no surprise to royal insiders that the Queen entrusted Anne with her most personal and devastating revelation. Not Charles, not Andrew, not even William. It was Anne, the daughter who never flinched, the one who had never once betrayed the sanctity of the family's values, never embarrassed the crown, and never sought attention. Her reward wasn't applause, it was trust. Behind the palace walls, Anne had always been the Queen's quiet right hand. Their relationship was built on more than blood. It was bound by shared responsibility, a love of horses, a disdain for fuss, and an unspoken understanding that the job came before emotion. So when the Queen sat down, perhaps months before her passing, to pen a secret will, she didn't question who would receive it. She knew only one person would honor its contents without twisting them for personal gain. One person who wouldn't leak its contents or distort its meaning. Anne. When Anne read the will for the first time inside the Balmoral study, those close to her say she didn't cry, she didn't tremble, she simply nodded. Her mother's words weren't surprising. They were confirmation of what she'd long suspected. She had seen the family drift. She had watched Charles struggle to control the narrative. She had observed Camilla's increasing presence and influence with quiet unease, and she had stood back, honoring her vow never to publicly interfere. But now, she had been given the Queen's voice, so she did what she always does. She acted with honor. She gathered the family in Windsor's private drawing room. No cameras, no press releases, just the bloodline. And there, without ceremony, she read aloud the Queen's final thoughts. Some in the room were stoic, others stunned, a few angry, but Anne didn't flinch. When Charles wiped away tears, Anne reportedly placed a firm hand on his shoulder, not out of comfort, but as a steady reminder that grief could not override responsibility. This wasn't about Anne claiming power. She didn't seek it. She never has. But in that moment, it became painfully clear. The Queen had chosen Anne not to lead the monarchy, but to protect its soul, a final guardian of truth, a sword of discretion, and a sister unshaken. In a family known for fractures and betrayal, Anne emerged as the only one the Queen fully, unquestionably trusted. And now, with the weight of that trust on her shoulders, Anne would have to decide. Would she keep the secret buried to preserve the peace, or reveal it, knowing it might break the crown to save it? Her answer came swiftly, and it would change everything. When Princess Anne finished reading the Queen's private will aloud, a silence fell over Windsor so heavy it seemed to press down on the very air. The Queen's words had been soft on paper, but thunderous in implication. And no one felt the weight more than King Charles III, her eldest son, now a monarch thrust under the harsh light of truth. Charles had always imagined this moment would bring finality, perhaps even peace. He had grieved his mother publicly, walking in solemn procession before the world. He had spoken eloquently at memorials, praising her legacy. He had worn the crown, accepted the oaths, endured the scrutiny. But what he had not prepared for, what he could never have prepared for, was her hidden judgment. It wasn't an outright rejection. The Queen had not stripped him of the throne in her private words, but in leaving such a powerful legacy to Anne and entrusting Diana's heirlooms to William and Charlotte, and never once acknowledging Camilla in a way that implied permanence. The message was clear. She doubted his reign. Sources inside the royal household say that Charles initially tried to maintain composure. He kept his hands clasped tightly in his lap, knuckles white, eyes fixed on the floor as Anne read. But as the Queen's final paragraph echoed through the drawing room, "Duty is not inherited by title, but earned by character," something inside him broke. A witness described how Charles, still wearing his black mourning tie, slowly rose from his chair, turned toward the window and whispered, "I wasn't ready for this." Those 5 words, barely audible, carried decades of pain. They weren't just about the letter. They were about his entire life. He wasn't ready when he was a young boy, groomed for kingship but raised by a mother who rarely showed affection. He wasn't ready when Diana shattered the fairy tale. He wasn't ready when Camilla became the storm behind the crown. And now, when he had finally arrived, finally been crowned, he was being reminded in his own mother's handwriting that perhaps it wasn't meant to be his at all. Anne didn't respond. She didn't need to. Her presence alone was steadying, even as the world Charles knew shifted under his feet. Palace aides later revealed that Charles refused to be seen publicly for the rest of the evening. He remained in his chambers for hours, a single photograph of his mother clutched in his hands. He didn't weep loudly, but those who passed by his door reported muffled sobs, and one phrase repeated more than once, "Why didn't she tell me?" It wasn't anger that overtook Charles. It was hurt, a child's hurt, the kind only a mother could cause. For all the speeches, ceremonies, and crowns, Charles had still hoped, desperately, that in her final act, the Queen would express full confidence in him, that she would say, "You're ready, my son." But instead, she had given that reassurance to Anne, and in legacy and symbol, to William. And so the king, no longer just a monarch but a grieving son, faced a truth more painful than abdication. He had gained the throne, but lost the one voice he needed to believe in it. And that truth would echo louder than any royal decree. As the shock of Queen Elizabeth's secret will rippled through Windsor's inner circle, another figure sat motionless, silent but seething. Camilla, Queen Consort in title, yes, but now, stripped of something far more vital than public praise, validation from the woman who mattered most. For Camilla, being queen had always been a hard-won battle. Decades of scandal, tabloid vitriol, and public hatred had left scars. She was called the other woman, the mistress, the reason a fairy tale had ended in tragedy. And though time and carefully orchestrated PR had softened the public's perception, the reality behind palace gates was never quite so forgiving. She had married Charles not simply for love, but for position, for permanence, and she had endured the humiliation of being sidelined, only to finally ascend to Queen Consort upon the Queen's death. But now, in one handwritten document, everything was undone. Queen Elizabeth had written pages about William, his quiet strength, his connection to the people. She had praised Anne's loyalty and even acknowledged Harry's wayward path. But Camilla, barely a mention. No personal tribute, no note of trust, not even a line acknowledging her role by Charles's side. It was erasure. Deliberate or not, it stung like treason. According to royal aides present during Anne's reading of the will, Camilla remained calm on the surface, stone-faced, even regal. But those who knew her best could see the shift in her eyes. A flicker of disbelief, then something colder, rage. Later, in a private corridor, Camilla reportedly turned to a senior aide and snapped, "So that's it then. I was never part of her plan." Her voice was low but laced with venom. This wasn't just disappointment. It was devastation disguised as disdain. She had spent years clawing her way into the royal fold, learning protocols, smiling beside the queen at events, playing the part. But now she saw what had always been true. No matter how long she stood beside Charles, the queen never saw her as a true royal. And worse, neither did Anne, or William, or perhaps even the country. Behind closed doors, Camilla confronted Charles that evening. The exchange, though never officially documented, was reportedly tense. A close staffer leaked that she told him, "You promised me she came around, that she finally accepted us." Was that a lie? Charles didn't answer, because in truth he didn't know. The queen had always been cordial, professional, but warm? No. Forgiving? Possibly. Accepting? Never entirely. And now, the will confirmed it. Camilla was queen by default, not design. What hurt most was not the omission, it was the clarity. The queen had the opportunity to pass on symbolic legitimacy. A single sentence could have cemented Camilla's place in royal history. Instead, silence did the opposite. Now, Camilla stood exposed, not just to the public, but to herself. She had the title, she wore the crown, but in the only judgment that mattered, the queen's final words, she was invisible. And that realization left Camilla colder than the crown itself ever could. As the revelations from Queen Elizabeth's secret will reverberated through the royal corridors, one couple stood at the center of it all, not by scandal, but by quiet design. Prince William and Princess Kate hadn't expected to be the recipients of anything so monumental. After all, wills were formalities, and the monarchy had already been passed in public view, or so they thought. But what Anne read next changed everything. Buried in the Queen's final pages was a personal letter, separate from the main provisions, written in her unmistakable cursive. It wasn't legally binding, but in terms of symbolic power, it was seismic. To William and Catherine, the Queen wrote, "You are the future I trust most. Let no one, blood or outsider, diminish your place. In you, the crown finds its conscience once again." For a moment, the entire room fell breathless. Charles, who had already emotionally withdrawn after hearing of Anne's elevated status, reportedly didn't even flinch, but Camilla's jaw visibly tightened, because this wasn't just a token line, it was a royal blessing. A nod from the Queen that her true legacy didn't lie with Charles and Camilla, but with William and Kate. And more telling still was what followed. The Queen had entrusted several personal heirlooms to the couple, not only items of jewelry, but private diaries, handwritten notes, and even letters between herself and Princess Diana, which she had kept in a locked drawer since Diana's death. The Queen's words made her intentions crystal clear. These belong to Catherine. Let her read them in quiet. Diana would have wanted it that way. Kate reportedly wept silently upon hearing this. She had never sought to replace Diana, but she had always felt the silent comparisons. The media had often painted her as the new people's princess, but now the Queen herself had passed on the final link to that title. In that moment, the crown became deeply personal. William, for his part, remained stoic, but even he couldn't hide the emotion in his eyes. This was no ordinary bequest. It was a quiet coronation of spirit, not of crowns and thrones, but of trust and lineage. Behind the scenes, palace aides began to talk. This letter, though unofficial, had more weight than many state declarations. Because Queen Elizabeth had always understood symbolism, she knew what her gestures meant, and she knew that the monarchy only survives if it rests on the right shoulders. And in this case, her message was resounding. Those shoulders belonged to William and Kate. In the days that followed, courtiers noticed a shift. William walked taller, with more quiet authority. Kate appeared at engagements with a new kind of presence, not louder, but more assured. There was a renewed sense of unity between them, an understanding that they were now the true heart of the royal family, with or without formal proclamation. But it wasn't just about them. It was about what they represented. Diana's compassion, Elizabeth's duty, the future's hope, all of it now entrusted to them. In a monarchy still reeling from old wounds and internal fractures, the Queen's hidden gift was more than a gesture. It was a recalibration of destiny, and William and Kate knew they weren't just carrying the crown's weight, they were carrying its soul. When the last line of Queen Elizabeth's secret will was read aloud, the room sat in stunned, reverent silence. There had been no grand theatrics, no pointed barbs, no royal shaming, only one final steady message. Duty must always rise above drama. That was her legacy. That was her way. For over 70 years, Queen Elizabeth II embodied restraint, discipline, and unwavering commitment. Through wars, scandals, divorces, and the digital age, she had been the monarchy's anchor. And in her final act, she wielded the same quiet precision she had always used to steer the crown through the storm. The will was never meant to humiliate or punish. It didn't need to. It simply revealed truths, who she trusted, who had earned their place, and who still clung to power out of ego rather than service. Charles, broken by the realization that his mother had withheld certain truths until her dying breath, now stood at a crossroads: either follow her vision or cling to a fading grip on authority. Camilla, for all her titles and ceremonial bows, was laid bare, not by accusation, but by omission, and that silence spoke volumes. But the Queen's sharpest clarity was reserved for Princess Anne, the daughter who had never chased a crown, but had always upheld its values. And for William and Kate, the couple she saw as the embodiment of continuity, grace, and modern monarchy. There was no room left for chaos. No tolerance for vendettas. The Queen had made her intentions known, not through speeches or televised statements, but through ink and parchment, the old way, the sovereign's way. And now, as the dust settles and the family regathers, one truth remains unshakable: Elizabeth's word still reigns. In a house divided by decades of whispers and wounds, her final decree has drawn the line, not with fury, not with spectacle, but with finality. The crown, she reminded them all, does not belong to those who grab for it. It belongs to those who serve, and that was her last, most powerful legacy.